Kendall, can you, I'm gonna send you another link, sorry. It's in the top of this email, sorry about that.
Like freedom. So, because I did.
Oh, there's some people.
Collaboration.
I gotta mute everybody.
You work at Bishop Garden. I do. It's a beautiful garden. Yeah. I think I recognize you. I was there just recently. The walk.
Yeah.
So I, you know, but having some kind of event. I remember, you know, I'm not going to have many events, right?
Okay, that's good.
What was the event that he on?
How do I mute all? Okay, everybody's muted. No.
Yes, yes, and I saw it after the fact. I read it.
Oh, you got the manually ad. That's awesome. Jenna Siegel, her.
Looked like it's still there. Yeah. Check it out.
There's Kendall.
It was enough. Yeah. Two sides.
Well, that's what I noticed is the one that we use for our meeting, our board meeting is different.
Okay, yeah.
So the one that
I'm
was,
glad I noticed that because they'd all be sitting here waiting.
yeah. So that's why I was a little worried. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, which kind of makes sense, actually. We don't want people using.
Because I set the one up for the board meeting and she set the one up for this.
It's good, they're different, actually, but I'm glad we thought about that. Yeah, thank you. If you want to share. Yeah, I do.
Oh, good.
Okay.
How's the camera with? What?
Oh, we don't need this now.
Technically, we don't have it. Oh, there's still people coming in. I'm like,
Are you going to use one of the microphones to start? You might as well. I think we're already recording.
yeah, I can. Right.
Do that again.
Want to get started here?
Yeah, you got a garden, my fence is on my garden. Yeah. I live back. That presents. Yeah. Now I did, I was see them on their others. Because now. First street next, you don't need now. So all that stuff.
Started pretty quick. It's hard for me to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. So you.
All right, so we want to get ready to go. Thanks everybody for coming tonight. Appreciate it. Here and everybody online. Are we good? Are we good, Barbara? You think? Awesome. All right, so welcome to our last speaker series of the season for 2023-2024. We have a good presentation for you tonight on tomorrow's garden from the Mission Gardens. Kendall, Kroesen, and also Dena, Cowan are here to present, tell us about the gardens a bit, and tell us about this new project with the gardens, which is pretty exciting, so. I want to remind everybody, this is a hybrid meeting, so I want to respect everybody's, time tonight, so keep your conversations to a minimum, people in the room, and if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll try to repeat the questions for everybody on the line as well. And with that, I'm going to present the speakers. Kendall is outreach coordinator, I believe, for Mission Gardens. And Dena is curator of collections for Mission Gardens. So I welcome them for coming tonight and thank you so much.
Thanks for having us here tonight. Yes, I'm Kendall. I'm the outreach coordinator. And at Mission Garden, how many of you have been to Mission Garden? Oh, all but one, maybe. Woohoo! All right. So I don't have to tell you everything. You have some experience with it, but what we're going to do tonight is divide this presentation into 3 parts. First part is that I'm going to tell you about what Mission Garden is and what it represents, and why we're well positioned to be the place to talk about not only past agriculture, but future agriculture in what we're currently developing, and that is the part of Mission Garden we're going to call tomorrow's garden. And then Dena, who has taken the lead for us at Mission Garden in the process of gathering information and starting to put together a plan for what's actually going to be in Mission Garden, is going to tell you about that process. And then the last third of the presentation is we're going to engage you and get your ideas about the garden of tomorrow, the future of gardening and agriculture in Tucson and in our region, and see what you guys can add to our process of this planning process for Mission Garden. So without any further ado, let's go to the next slide. Mission Garden's mission. Mission Garden inspires people to connect to this land by reclaiming agricultural traditions for our community in a changing world. So we're bringing the past, we're connecting with agricultural traditions, but we're in a changing world. So that suggests the need possibly for agriculture and gardening to be a little bit different in that changing world in the future. And our vision statement is Mission Garden envisions a world where diverse communities collaborate to grow abundant foods sustainably. So even in our vision statement, although we're a garden that represents thousands of years of past agriculture, we're looking to the future to engage communities and to grow abundant food. Well, this is what you see as you approach Mission Garden and our visitor entrance. But as you come inside, it's a whole different story from anything else you see really pretty much anywhere in Tucson, but especially in the broad historic floodplain of the Santa Cruz River, which used to be so different. Abundant crops, orchards, representing many, many people of many different eras. Just to locate you in the world of Tucson here, Mission Garden is right there at the base of a mountain. What you can see here is the eroded bed of the Santa Cruz River, kind of running vertically to the left of Interstate 10, also running vertically through the middle of the photograph. To the right, upper right of Interstate 10 is downtown Tucson, with the University of Arizona out of the frame a bit to the
17. The vertical one is 17, the angled one is 10.
No, this is 10,
That's
and
10.
it splits off into 17 down here,
Oh,
and 10
down.
goes east. It's a little, it's a little bit farther south.
19.
19. Yeah, not 17, 19.
That's Flagstaff.
This, what's shown on the slide now is the Clearwater Archaeological Site that Mission Garden is just a small part of. And in turn, this archaeological site, Clearwater Archaeological Site, is just one of many scattered along the historic floodplain of the Santa Cruz River. And what do I mean by the historic floodplain of the Santa Cruz River? Today we think of the Santa Cruz River as this narrow eroded flood control ditch going from south to north through the middle of the picture there. But I have colored yellow the historic floodplain of the Santa Cruz River. It's much, much wider, nearly a mile wide at this point. And in fact, when I re-looked at this picture again, I think I should have gone a little bit farther. But if you're familiar with driving from the west side into downtown, toward downtown, you go over the riverbed, you go under I-10, you come up alongside the Pima County buildings on the left and the federal building on the right. As you're coming into the old part of downtown, the road rises a little bit there. That's the east bank of that historic floodplain, which we think in 1810 might have looked something like this. And this isn't just some artist's guess, right? This is actually based on old maps that showed the shapes of these fields. This is would have been during the Spanish colonial period, but also this is art by Palmer Roca, the artist Palmer Roca, but also based on a three-dimensional reconstruction of this part of Tucson by an archaeologist named Doug Gann. So this is actually quite accurate as to what the view from a mountain would have been in about 1810, looking northeast, Catalina Mountains on the top there, Mission Garden at the base of the mountain, some Native American dwellings left from the village of Tucson, from which Tucson got its name, the old Mission San Agustin a little further over, and then the Presidio del Tucson in the distance there on the east bank of the Santa Cruz River, starting in 1775. So not just a eroded riverbed, but a mile-wide floodplain full of crops, and not only in the 4-acre Mission Garden, but all across that floodplain. And if you don't believe the artist, here's a photograph from 70 years later in 1880, looking from more or less that same vantage point on a mountain looking northeast. You got old remnants of the Mission Garden here, the Mission here, what is becoming downtown in the distance there on the east bank of the Santa Cruz River. But again, a nearly mile-wide floodplain full of crops that have been used for agriculture for thousands of years. You can go through these slides like every second or two. This is starting in 2000, I forget, 5. So it just shows a sequence of art creating Mission Garden through the last 13 years or so. And this is what it looks like today, with a timeline of gardens representing many different cultures and many different eras of our history, starting on the west side here with plants native to the Sonoran Desert from which people harvested food, and a series of other gardens going through all the different timelines up to the present. And that's what I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But for reference, down here is a plot that's going to end up being tomorrow's garden. So let's just go through growing a garden to exemplify Tucson's rich multicultural agricultural history. This is one of the most rewarding things about Mission Garden, is that people, many of these different historical ethnic groups and language groups that have been at Mission Garden have come, or doing agriculture on that floodplain, have come, their descendants have come to Mission Garden. And I think, as Keith can tell you, being a volunteer there, working side by side, people of Chinese descent, African Americans, often people, Yaqui people, Mexican American people, Anglo people, all continuing to bring this agriculture to life. So just going through that timeline, I don't have a picture, I guess, of the native plants in the Sonoran Desert from which people harvested food, so use your imagination. But this represents the early agriculture period, which may have started, it started at least 4,100 years ago, because we have a radiocarbon date on corn, but now some archaeologists say maybe as much as 5,000 years ago, corn came into the area. We know that from another archaeological site a little farther down the river, that they would have brought water off of the river in a canal and then let it flow down lateral canals, flood irrigating patches of corn during that time. Corn like this, chapalote corn, which you can get from native seed search, is what we believe to be the closest extant or still existing kind of corn to the corn that they were growing back in the early agriculture period. About 2,000 years ago, I'm going through this fast because we want to, you've all been to Mission Garden, you can all go again, read more about it in our info boxes, but I want to get to through this so that Dena can talk about tomorrow's garden. We represent the early ceramic period and the Hohokam period, early ceramic period starting about 2,000 years ago when people started to live there full-time, year-round, made a lot of ceramics, added beans and squash and cotton to the crops that they were growing, to the corn. And then about 400 years later, a 1,000-year period of the Hohokam when population densities were pretty high in the Tucson Valley. I don't remember estimates, but in the tens of thousands, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a scattered bunch of beings.
Yeah.
There were denser populations.
Maybe not rivaled, the population density, maybe not rivaled until the territorial period. And very dependent on corn, beans and squash and cotton, but also introduced some cultivation of a small grass called little barley, which we are growing right now in the Hohokam garden. Go see it. It's not something you'll see in very many places. And these agaves, partway through the Hohokam period, they were growing big plantations of thousands of agaves out in the desert as an additional source of food and fiber. By the way, I'm going to pass this around in case you're not on our mailing list and want to get, every 3 weeks we send out an email with what's coming up. And one of the things that's coming up in the garden is the Agave Heritage Festival. We will be inviting people to come help us plant agaves this week on Thursday morning. And then on Saturday, we're going to have a full 4 hours of events from 8 to noon with a panel discussing the future, the possible future of agave, not just the past, but the future of agave in local agriculture, food production, fiber production, with a really stellar set of panelists moderated by Dena here. And then we usually roast our own local Hohokam agaves in our own roasting pit, but this year, really special, the Hualapai, people from the Hualapai Nation are going to come down here and they're going to roast a different species of agave, Agave utahensis, from northern Arizona, and a different kind of pit located in the place that's going to be tomorrow's garden, where we may, in fact, I'll leave this to our future discussion, but maybe agaves will be part of that mix of crops in tomorrow's garden. All right, let's keep going. After the Hohokam period ended around 1450, there were still people around living at a lower population density. We think those were the O'odham people that are still here today. Growing, and in our O'odham garden, we grow specific varieties of corn, beans, and squash, and cotton, and tepary beans, and devil's claw, and tobacco, and maybe some things I'm forgetting, that we know that are the specific varieties the Hohokam or the O'odham people grew and are still growing. And then go to the next slide. Like O'odham 60-day corn, O'odham pink beans, and Sacaton cotton. And then we come to the Spanish colonial period, starting in 1692 with the arrival of Father Eusebio Kino, and then later other missionaries and colonists, resulting in a scene kind of like this, and the introduction of many other crops brought from Southern Europe, but which in turn had come there from many other parts of the old world like pomegranates. There's pomegranate. And like oranges, these are Seville oranges, Mexican sweet lime, quince, and many others, stone fruits, loquats, mulberries, many different kinds of fruit trees in the Spanish colonial orchard. There's also a grape vineyard and lots of vegetables, including this cauliflower plant that Dena can tell you about. She's the expert in that amazing cauliflower plant. And here's me with a cabbage.
That's our next
Fava beans, a bean of the Mediterranean area that was domesticated there and grows so excellently here in the winter, as some of you gardeners probably know. And they look like that. I have to put in another plug for an upcoming event here. This is, we do grow wheat, and there is a wheat field in Mission Garden growing right now. And every year in May, we recreate the traditional harvest festival and celebration of San Isidro, the patron saint of farmers and laborers. San Isidro's day is May 15th, and they would harvest the wheat on that day. We do it on a Saturday closest to that, so it's going to be Saturday, May 18th. This is one of our signature festivals. It's just, it will blow your mind if you haven't been
Is it
there.
all day?
It's all morning, 8 to noon. This time of year, we've gone to our summer hours, 8 to noon.
That's a very cool.
Yeah, question was the timing of that, and we do all of our public stuff from 8, most of our public stuff from 8 to noon, Wednesday through Saturday during the hot season. We go to 8 to 2 p.m. in the winter. But you'll see people celebrating the saint. You'll see people harvesting wheat with sickles, a horse threshing the wheat, winnowing the wheat. We'll even mill some wheat into flour with a traditional mill. And we'll even feed you the traditional food for that day called pozole de trigo, a soup with, instead of hominy in it, with wheat grains and a lot of other healthy stuff. We have a garden representing the autumn people after contact with Europeans and how their gardening and farming evolved with the arrival of new crops, some of which they adopted quite readily. Like cowpeas, one variety of which is black-eyed peas, if you're familiar with those. Grows very, very well in our garden in the summer. And then we have a garden representing the Mexican period, from the Mexican Revolution in 1821 to the Gadsden Purchase in 1854, ratified in 1854. And that has a whole bunch of new things that kind of represent that period, things coming up from Mexico, like nopal, from which you make nopalitos, and they have edible fruits. Epazote, a commonly used herb in Mexican cooking, both medicinal and culinary, and many other things in that garden. It's one of my favorite parts of the garden. It's just so representative of that time. And then we have a Chinese garden for Chinese farmers who were in this region starting in the 1870s, working on the Southern Pacific Railroad, but then moving into other industries and other professions, including agriculture, leasing land from landholders there, and growing crops, taking them downtown on horse-drawn wagons and selling door to door, but also introducing a whole range of new crops from China, which they used to feed themselves, but also by 1900, there was already a Chinese restaurant in Tucson, foreshadowing the food production and multicultural restaurant scene that we have today as a UNESCO city of gastronomy. Things like lupa and winter melon and bok choy and tatsoi and jujube and loquat and many more I don't have time to tell you about, but again, come and see it. The Michael Moore Medicinal Garden, 50 plants native to the desert Southwest that have traditional medicinal uses, but which were also kind of brought into the Anglo or Western tradition of herbal medicine by a guy named Michael Moore, whose students, some of which come to the garden and help us tend this garden. Next slide. Yerba mansa, one of the principal, most important native herbs among the plants in that garden. We have a Yoeme garden representing the Yaqui people who were originally from the Yaqui River Valley in Sonora, but displaced by long periods of warfare with Spain and Mexico. There was a diaspora, some of them ended up here. They've been recognized as a native nation here by the federal government for 45 years with a reservation in many local communities. And they are one of many groups for which we have a community stakeholder committee. It's not just us at Mission Garden making all the decisions about each of these gardens. We have a lot of input from these communities that the garden represents. Speaking of that, in the Africa in the Americas garden, we have this community stakeholder for that. Garden too, where in the summer we grow a lot of crops that originated or were domesticated in Africa. Anybody guess some of those crops that came from Africa? A lot of people don't know that a lot of crops were domesticated originally in Africa, like watermelon and cantaloupe and okra, and sesame, and cowpeas, yes, sorghum and millet. Astonishing garden there in the summer. All right, well, there's some lessons we've learned about, again, engaging the community, Chinese farmers from the Chinese Cultural Center helping us. We have many volunteers working in the garden. This is David, one of our great volunteers, and one of the volunteers from Iskashita, whose headquarters are now here, your neighbors right here. And lots of children coming on to the garden on Saturdays and in field trips from schools. Molly, people of all ages and all backgrounds helping out. Megan, one of our staff members, who's just really blossomed as a staff member and representative of the nation. Yeah, she's blossomed. People from Native Seed Search, we have, I can't name them all. We have many community partners, from the people at the university to many refugee groups and groups on the reservations and other nonprofits in town. Our floodplains can still grow food. We give away about half of the food, and as the garden has matured, we're talking about a lot of food here. I think it was something like this. These aren't the squashes from last summer, but last summer we quantify all the crops that we grow. It was something like 1,800 pounds of squash that we grew, and specifically the autumn har squash. A lot of which, again, we gave away to retirement homes on reservations and other locations. That's Jerome, our garlic expert and expert docent. I can't really represent in just a few slides how much food we're really growing now, but it's happening. The garden is being repopulated by a lot of wildlife that probably was the wildlife that was common across that mile-wide historic floodplain that's now covered mostly by streets and houses and businesses, I-10 and all of that. So it's there, this fertile soils, the archaeological sites, the potential for agriculture and wildlife still there in that historic floodplain, and it's coming out at Mission Garden. And we have a acequia or canal, which harbors a lot of life too. We don't irrigate with it, but it brings back the look and feel of the historic floodplain, and it's full of living things. Draws lots of dragonflies and damselflies, hundreds, probably thousands actually, of Helitop minnow fish and 10 species of native aquatic plants. So there's a bunch of new developments, not only Mission Garden, but we've just inaugurated the Takwich Moho Uim, or place where you harvest bear grass and yucca. That's the name of it in the Autumn language. And this is located on the west side of the garden. just an amazing, beautiful place right now, full of wildflowers. But also many sources of fiber for basketry and other pursuits. We're, as Keith was mentioning earlier, we're working on the rancheria, where our granary and chicken coop have been, and we're covering that area over with a roof, and it's going to be really special. And we're working on an area called the Statehood Garden, which is going to represent agriculture after 1912, when we became a state. And that may be the next big project after tomorrow's garden. But some progress conceptually being made on it. And then tomorrow's garden as well. How will we grow food in Tucson in the future? The loss of arable land, population growth, climate change, water scarcity. And at this point, I think I'm going to hand it over to Dena. And don't forget to turn on your microphone.
I think it's on.
Okay.
Samantha, speak up.
Okay, so yeah, so what do you think? You guys have experience, everybody is a gardener here. Climate's already changing, right? Last summer, anybody grow food last summer? Have problems?
Yeah.
You want me to go over there? Okay. Let me see if I can just, I have a couple of notes of things I don't want to forget. So yeah, can you change the slide?
Yep.
So we have, the Tomorrow's Garden is actually a little bit bigger than the small plot. As we've been thinking about Tomorrow's Garden, how are we going to design it, what's going to go in it, we realized, oh my gosh, there's so much interest. There's so many possibilities. That's a really small space. And we've had people coming from the university, all these people want to try all these things. We've had so much outreach. We've actually started kind of really formally designing this or thinking about this, what would be in this. Back in 2016, we had a Coverdell Fellow, returning Peace Corps Fellow, who spent 3 years doing internship in the garden. And he's a farmer from Nebraska, farming on his own, organic farmer, all kinds of experience. And he did his thesis project on the design of the Tomorrow's Garden. And in that process of outreach, this is his thesis, little book that he produced. He was a landscape architecture student at the U of A. And this is his plan, what part of, one way of looking at his plan. He also did a lot of outreach. He worked with Ironwood Tree Experience, which is a group of youth, because Tomorrow's Garden is for tomorrow, right? It's for the youth. So it's really important to engage the youth in this process of like figuring out how are we going to grow food in the future, not just all us old people. And that's been a lot of community outreach. We actually did an exhibition in 2016 at the Tucson City of Gastronomy, at a tent of kind of explaining why is Tucson designated a city of gastronomy, and what does that mean? There was a joke that the late Big Jim Griffith said, it must have been all about the tepary beans, the gastronomy. So fortunately, we lost Big Jim, but his jokes live on. Anyway, so no, it wasn't about the teparies only. It was partly about the teparies. Our deep culture, agricultural heritage is part of why we won that designation, UNESCO City of Gastronomy, but also because of the way that the creative things that we're doing to meet all these challenges, right? In our food system. And one of them is Mission Garden, kind of like getting back to the roots and showing people how rich and diverse and all the potential that there is, right? At that exhibition, we had some, this sign, the challenge of climate change, population growth, water scarcity, need farmers to ask new questions about how to grow food in a changing landscape. and how are we gonna grow food in the future? So we started, there was an exhibit and we got a lot of, feedback. And, this is, and we had people write down things of what they thought, and this is, back from 2016. And this whole thing is all this outreach. So we had this, like, we formed a committee, so Brad did his plan, he did this outreach, it has some kind of basic outlines, rainwater harvesting, greenhouse, I can't even see it because it's not.
Drought tolerant plants.
Drought tolerant plants, community action, having like people being a part of it, making it, interactive, sustainable building materials, traditional technology, dryland farming. So yeah, in Mission Garden, a lot of people, the first thing they think about the future of farming, they think about hydroponics, aquaponics, agrivoltaics, a lot of like high tech solutions, which are, happening, and they're really good to experiment with all of those things. Controlled environment agriculture, like they're doing at the U of A with the agrivoltaics. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Agrivoltaics, aquaponics, okay. So a lot of these things are really high tech, and some people at Mission Garden, we've been thinking, what is our mission in Mission Garden? Like, what are we gonna contribute to that? And we think it's kind of really important to always keep the past. Like, what lessons can we draw from the past and this whole agricultural history or heritage museum, which is what we are, to like apply to the future? What lessons can we learn from the past? So we did the first thing we did when we kind of initiated this process of designing and deciding what we're going to do, which has been recently, several months ago, I would say 6 months ago, maybe. I think our first meeting was like in May. So we did a new process of getting a new committee together, and we wanted to make sure it was really diverse committee. So we wanted to have representation of Indigenous people, young people, people of all ages, all backgrounds. So we really strive to do that. And we did another kind of like push to do outreach, and the community at the U of A, and just many people, and kind of brought all of those things together. Do you wanna pass the slide? So this is the first kind of breaking the ground, just kind of, we had a workshop with some other community members to ask them what their kind of perspective is, what they were thinking. A lot of, and during this time, really, I learned that they were thinking mostly of like engaging youth, like how, because we're losing farmers, right? Like most farmers are ready to retire, and the young people don't want to start farming. And so not only are we kind of facing climate change, water scarcity, population growth, and a lot of loss of arable land, but also we're losing our farmers, we're losing our knowledge base. And so the autumn, really reminded us that it's important to engage the youth, to get them excited, enthusiastic about farming, because who's going to grow our food if it's not the young people, right? And so the disappearance of farmers is a really important thing. If you all are, maybe you're more used to backyard gardening, which is also a potential solution, right? Is having more small backyard farms, right? But that was during the workshop that we did, and we ceremoniously planted some of the first cover crops. You want to go to the next? And that's kind of the cover crops that we planted were these tillage radishes. Tillage radishes are good for their daikon radishes, and their nickname is tillage radishes because they're really deep rooted, and they are good for breaking up the soil if it's been a long time been compacted. And so that's why we planted those. And then we have a variety of different cover crops that we put in there just to get the soil going while we're doing our designing, right? Because let's just plant some stuff. And so that's what it's like now. I'm gonna keep going. So as Kendall was mentioning, and again, tying the past to the present and to the future potentially, we are looking at agave as a possible crop for the future. And it just coincided that the Wallapai are coming this year to, a group of Wallapai are coming to share with us their practices of how they roast agave. And we roast agave traditionally here, more similar to the way that the people here roasted it, which is with rock lined pits. But they don't use rock lined pits. So we were like, what, our pit wasn't gonna work for them. So we thought we needed, they dig a 3x2 hole, 3 foot deep, 3 foot wide, and 2 foot wide, 3 foot long and 2 foot wide. And we thought, well, the only place we can do that is in the tomorrow's garden, because that's not been cultivated yet. And so we always have to have an archaeologist on site when we dig a hole deeper than a foot or 18 inches sometimes. There are different stories about that. So Hobart Teal, who is an archaeologist who participated in the excavations in the Clearwater site that you saw before, including in Mission Garden back in the early aughts, late 1990s. He discovered in the pit while he was monitoring a seed storage jar, assured from a seed storage jar. And why does he know it's a seed storage jar? Because of the curve it has. It's like the top of the traditional seed storage jars. And so again, we are connecting past and future. In the tomorrow's garden, he also found another sherd of a food storage jar that was 500 years. 500 years apart from the other one. And so it's like we have all these layers of history, and now we're going into the future. So next slide. So this is we have one of our committee members, and Audrey, I don't know if any of you know her, she's an amazing project manager, and she put together all these materials. We have, like, how many pages is this?
Oh, 5 or 6 with like 150 items. This is just the first
So
page.
these are some of the things that people have suggested, and that she compiled it all and put it on this huge list of all the different things, vertical gardening, container gardening, harvesting water from solar parking ramadas, a new well permission garden, maximize, use both traditional and modern water supply, all these things, dry land farm, just on and on and on. So there's a lot of things that people have suggested over time, and just too many to fit in a little space. So we've done 2 things to kind of like be able to embrace more things. One, almost the first thing we decided when we formalized the end of the kind of outreach period is we're going to make this a hub of information about what people are doing. So not only are we going to demonstrate like physically every single thing in the garden, but we're gonna share what other people are doing. So if we decide that we can't fit aquaponics in there, we're gonna have signage about who is doing aquaponics in this region so they can go see it. Escachita Refugee Network. That's not like something you're gonna put in a garden, but that's a good tomorrow's garden concept, right? Gleaning food that would otherwise go to waste. And so we want to be a hub for like educational, like kind of what are people going to do? What are some of the strategies, even though we don't fit it in the garden itself? And then can you go to the next slide? So also another thing we're doing is we're expanding our area, and in our thinking about the garden is not just, so this whole area, and we're even going to go beyond the walls, and we're thinking wildlife, more natural areas. Where the statehood garden, originally we didn't have this irrigation canal going through this this was one large, the path was in a different place and we reworked, we got rid of the irrigation canal that we started. By the way, you know those pictures that Kendall was showed at the beginning with like the dirt lot? That's when I started at Michigan Gardens, so it was like 13 years ago, so yeah, so there used to be, when we first came to Michigan Garden, there was nothing there except these basins of gravel and this really ugly 1960s period irrigation canal. So we got rid of that and we have the Asaki, or the irrigation canal, crossing through because we wanted it to follow the path of one of the prehistoric Hohokam period irrigation canals. So it mirrors that same path. So it crossed through this garden. So what we're gonna do is, instead of just having the garden in here, we're gonna expand it to either side, and we're gonna include the irrigation canal. So the idea is, okay, we don't have just this little garden space, but we're thinking about our whole environment. Like farming should think about, environmental restoration and wildlife habitat. And, what are the native plants that you're gonna have around to provide food and shelter for the native wildlife? And so we're thinking about it kind of in a bigger way, that farming in the future should take into consideration as a holistic way, thinking about the environment in general, not just your, production, right? So thinking about, and nowadays organic farming is kind of like, so to get an organic farm certification, you just have to not apply pesticides and herbicides and not use synthetic fertilizers. But and the new certification is regenerative farming. And in regenerative farming, you have to consider the health and well-being of the animals, the health and well-being of the farm workers, and just kind of the whole environment, the water, the soil health, everything. So it's a step like beyond organic farming. So kind of that's what we're thinking, as there's a kind of some swales, because the water from the rainwater runoff goes around here and around here, so it's an opportunity to plant some more native plants that need a little bit more water. And so, yeah, so that's kind of, and also we have this compost area here, and that's part of the future too, is right, recycling materials, healthy soils, and shade. We have a shade house over there, which is also, we think, one of the most important elements of the future of farming is shade. Working with shade, whether it be agrovoltaics or shade tunnels, we definitely want to include a shade element for people, for farmers, and for plants. And we want to compare, okay, shade, planting the same plants in the shade and out of the shade, and see what happens. And just kind of collect some data on that. Let's see, do you want to go? Okay, so this is like, we're starting into this design phase, and this is Matthew Meyer, one of our really brilliant young participants, and he's this is kind of his little drawing. What we're doing now is we're starting to actually plan and design the garden, and each of us are kind of sharing our visions and combining them. And so this is, some of his ideas, just kind of in a sketch. So that's what we're working on now. You want to go to the next one? Yeah, so now I want to open it up to you all to see whether you want to, what are you thinking? What are your experiences? What are some of the things that you've learned? And what would you recommend for that we do?
And people speak, if you could just repeat.
Sure.
Do you have any questions online? Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, questions or anything, and like also what do you guys think about tomorrow's garden? What is with the name, by the way, we call it Tomorrow's Garden because we think it's tomorrow is here. It's not like the first name that we were originally gonna have, that was assigned to it was the Garden of the Future, but it sounded like so futuristic. It sounded like some kind of like thing in the future, whereas we're already experiencing all these things, climate change, water scarcity, there's less and less arable land. So how are we gonna grow food in the future? In this region, or do we wanna grow food in this region? I mean, that's a possibility, right?
I think we could, I think we should.
I was wondering if there's any advantage to putting your channel that you put in where there used to be one. Is there any advantage in terms of growth and proliferation, both with animals and other species in doing that?
Yes, so good question. So
Can you
the,
repeat the question?
yes,
Ah.
so the question is there any advantage the irrigation canal or the acequia, which is the Spanish term for the irrigation canal? And they were used way back in the Hulagun period, so we should probably find out what the name would be and them too. But I don't know it right now. Yeah, so is there any advantage in terms of wildlife or plant life to having that? And so our irrigation canal, it's actually a water feature which circulates. So it doesn't go leak into the soil. It's lined, it's made to look like dirt, but it's actually not dirt. It's sculptural, right? Some sculptors actually made it and created it to look like an irrigation canal would have looked like. But it doesn't permeate, it's impermeable. But we are trying to, it definitely is habitat for protected species of fish and plants. And that's why we were able to do it. We were able to get the funding to get rid of the other old one and build this one. Dennis Caldwell, who's a kind of the local eminent riparian habitat restoration expert in the region. He helped us design it and build it actually. And so we were able to get the funding for it because for a grant to be a riparian habitat for the protected species of top minnow and water umble specifically that Kendall referred to before. And definitely there's a lot of wildlife coming. We have some wildlife cameras that never came to the garden before because of the water.
Can I just
Of course.
interject something?
Yeah.
This is a really interesting part of the garden regarding wildlife, because this end of the canal has less steep sides, so animals find it easier to get down in the water. So we have the trail camera right there pointing at that end of the canal. And it's really been interesting to see how the garden is permeable to wildlife in spite of the big old wall around it. Birds, obviously, we've seen over 100 species of birds, and there's probably something like 10 or 15 of them that nest right in the garden. But this camera has regularly captured raccoons and sometimes bobcats in the middle of the night who have come over the wall, and once a gray fox as well. So
Raccoons.
yeah, raccoons get down in the water and drink and find stuff to eat. So it's kind of a remarkable part of the garden for wildlife, and so that's definitely going to be a part of how all of this plays out.
Yeah, the way I was able to convince Matthew Meyer, who's the young fellow that I was mentioning before, to be a part of the Tomorrow's Garden Committee was because he's a riparian habitat person. And I was telling him that, it's important to kind of integrate wildlife habitat and environmental restoration into the future of farming. So this, it says Ciénaga here, that's a Spanish word for like, swampy area and because Tucson means spring at the base of the Black Mountain. So like, it was a completely different environment before. It was a swampy area. The Spanish, colonial period, records refer to there was an attack by the Apache on the Presidio, and some of the people were in the Pueblo in the Tucson at the time, and they describe it as an island, you know, between the huge irrigation canals and the river and the springs leading to them. So, you know, we want to kind of give that idea too of what the place used to look like and what it could look like. You had your hand?
A question. I recently read in the paper that the Santa Cruz might be on the endangered river list. How will that play with this? Like if they get money to do more things with it, would you interface with that at all?
Yes, the question was about the Santa Cruz recently being designated as one of the most endangered rivers in the United States.
That came out in the
So-
paper.
This
just
morning.
yesterday. Yesterday morning.
Yesterday.
Mhm. And yes, they are working on different land stewards and water stewards are working on creating or designating the Santa Cruz stretch around. I'm not sure exactly what the the geographic limitations are, but around Mission Garden as a refuge, as a wildlife refuge. And you know, Mission Garden is advocating for the space surrounding Mission Garden, which was a dump during the 50s and 60s, to remain open space and not be developed, because all around the garden has already been developed, and we're advocating it for an open space for like a park for wildlife corridor and for a green belt near the town and city. And so this is all part of this effort, I think, of this coalition to say how important the remaining, riparian habitat is, and how important it can be for wildlife, and also for they're working on the bringing up the water tables. They can't bring it too far up. It's very difficult because of the landfill. They don't want to bring it up too far, but also they do want to restore some of the water table levels to as low as they can.
Online question?
Has Mission Garden pursued grants through the city for potential solar installation?
So have we pursued grants for potential solar installations? Yeah, that's been considered as one possible aspect of Tomorrow's Garden, in fact, so that we could demonstrate agrivoltaics, growing crops under solar panels, for which there are interesting synergies between the growing of plants, crops, and the production of electricity. We have not gotten a grant specifically for that. And there's some question about whether it's appropriate to have solar panels there in the garden, which is essentially a historic garden.
Yeah, I think we are considering several different versions of solar. One would be solar panels to shade like one of the paths where people are gonna learn about things, and kids are gonna come and they're gonna do activities, and just to shade. And also the agrivoltaics, which would actually shade the farmers and the crops. And we're trying to figure out whether we can do this on, I don't know, has anybody been to Monza Elementary School or Bashman? So those are massive solar panels, and I've been asking the Moses Thompson and Greg Barron Gifford about like whether we can scale it down, or whether it makes sense, or whether we're just gonna point to those other places that are doing it, and Biosphere too, I believe also. Another interesting thing that we discovered when we went out to visit a garden on the reservation was these solar panels that are creating water that by
So condensation.
condensation, exactly, thank you. And these are called hydro panels, and that's really interesting thing, and it's just a panel, and you can, I think it's like with one panel, you can get like 16 ounces a day of really high quality drinking water, not even just to water. I was talking to the people there and they were like, it would be a shame to water the crops, but we love our crops, so we wouldn't mind using high quality water for that.
We have another question online she wants to ask herself. Let's see.
Hi, this is Janice Siegel-Stormont, and I'm with the Water Committee at Sustainable Tucson. But we've done a lot of rainwater harvesting in our own yard. And one of the most impactful thing is that we can do is rainwater harvesting basins, where we've even directed it, from gutters and downspouts from the roof into channels that water a basin to water our jujubes. And I have a question and also one more suggestion as well. But my question is, because Mission Garden is like over a landfill, how deep can you dig the basins? And is this a possibility to have like basins between different like native trees? And to make like rows of them, like they have done like in other parts where they brought back whole almost like whole habitats with the rock dams and stuff like that in other parts of Arizona.
Yeah, the question, well, there were two questions, one suggestion and a question. Suggestion was water harvesting from downspouts from roofs and variety of things. Yes, one of the first things that we realized when we were embarking on this new garden design was like, Mission Garden is already doing a lot of these tomorrow's garden things, and a lot of them are like from the past. So like rainwater harvesting, we do that with our agave rock mulch. So that's what the ancient people did. It's nothing new. They harvested water back thousands of years ago, harvested water for diverting the water into their fields, also capturing water with rock mulch, passive basin, rainwater harvesting with sunken basins, which we definitely do that all over the garden. And we will also do that in the tomorrow's garden. We don't know whether we're going to actually do cisterns, because I think that creating like the soil, like more moisture retention in the soil so that it's a sponge, you can harvest so much more water that way than you can in a cistern. The garden is not on a landfill. The question was, since it's on a landfill, can we do? No, it's not on the landfill. The garden was preserved intact, without, it was never part of the landfill. Thankfully, Pima County, we can thank for that. And also we can kind of thank the fact that it was in the church hands, and then it was Bishop Salpointe owned the land for a while, and then it was it stayed in private hands, and then Pima County was able to purchase it. The dump was a city dump, and so it was never city land. It was always private and then Pima County land. So Pima County purchased the land for historic preservation, and we can thank them for doing that. No, the landfill surrounded the garden, but was never part of the garden. So the only restrictions we have in digging is because we have to respect the archaeology underneath.
Question and suggestions, if you're taking suggestions.
Yes.
So question is, how much, say, compost or mulch, etc., are you importing from outside the garden compared to how much you're making, creating biomass to put on tomorrow's garden? That's the question. And then suggestions of like, you know, and you know this, but really, really heavy sheet mulching and then focusing on the biological, you know, activity of the soil with different preparations and all the things you can put into it to make it a really vibrant, living sponge, you know, and I know you've done regenerative design, so you know about that, but that's what I do in myself in a certain area. So.
Yeah, so the suggestion was, question was how much, soil amendment and, mulch and compost are we importing? And how much are we making? And the suggestion is to, really pile on the organic material and, create healthy soil.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're speaking to the choir.
Yeah.
We love that. We love soil. We are, you know, if there's
Yeah.
anything sacred, it's the soil where we're working. And that's, you know, my kind of main goal is always to like, no, we gotta protect the soil. I'm always kind of the one who's yeah, really taking care of the soil. That I feel like that's the first thing we can do for tomorrow, right? There's so much topsoil lost with conventional agriculture just because of tillage and wind. Just to start with, and that's a real problem too, a real challenge that nobody talks about is loss of topsoil, which is huge. So yes, keep the ground covered, protected, add organic material. And the answer to your question about how much do we import, we still import, apart from the fact that we create massive amounts of compost material.
Yeah.
And pruning and everything, we keep it on site.
Yeah.
We have an amazing volunteers that come on Tuesdays and chip.
Cool.
And then we have the composting area over here. We want to use in the Tomorrow's Garden, one of the directives is to use the materials, like some of the poles and stuff for structures, for shade structures and stuff. So recycling materials, that's cycling materials, that's really important to us. And the wood chips that we're using are currently landscapers who don't want to pay to, you know, get rid of their stuff or dump it somewhere. So they come and they chip it. And so it's kind of relatively local, not completely. So we're working there. And the more you create, you know, healthy soil, the less you have to over time import. So
We have imported a lot initially, but not from far away. A lot of it has come from Tank's green stuff, which is of course making this stuff locally. So even when we haven't had the biomass to make a lot of our own mulches and composts, at least it's coming from the local community.
yeah, when I first started at Mission Garden, like you could not get a seed in the ground.
Yeah.
Right.
It was so
So
compacted from so much work and heavy machinery and years of baking in the sun, like literally you could not get a seed in the ground. And I was like, we gotta get some compost and mulch, and that's how I met Emily and that, you know. So anyway, so yeah, so we were starting from and now the soil is very spongy and much better, so.
Yeah, speaking to the rainwater harvesting question, not only are most of our garden areas sunken down below the pathway system so that no rainwater escapes, but as Dena said, the soils have been so improved over the last 13 years that whereas before work started, big rains came and there was just puddles on the ground, not infiltrating at all.
Lakes.
But now it actually infiltrates quite quickly. So the combination of soil amendment, soil production, and the rainwater harvesting nature of the garden is harvesting a lot of rainwater and making great soil.
Yeah, and just chop and drop, keep it in the ground, keep the ground covered, all of that we practice, yes. Oh, wait, I think she was
Oh,
first.
sorry, I already asked her to unmute.
Okay,
Can we
sorry.
just?
Hi, it's Jenna again. So, yeah, I'm glad to hear that, that the landfill isn't under it. It was my understanding because I had suggested at one point that the water could be taken from off of like a mountain, but I heard that you couldn't do that because of the landfill, so that was my understanding. But I'm glad that you're doing rainwater harvesting and that that's totally working for you. I've seen some videos where they have done like planting like throughout it, like it's not just one crop, but that there'll be like a row of like a basin and then something, you know, help the water infiltrate, and then trees, and particularly like mesquite trees or, you know, other bean trees of the desert can put a lot of nitrogen in the ground. And I found that like we've got like a little mesquite guild and it nourishes all the stuff under it. And for your future garden, that if like, if the trees are planted in the right places, that they could shade, the plants that really need some shade and maybe not fall over places where plants need, you know, need more sun or something like that, but that I've really found like our whole garden area is covered by a palo verde, and in the summer, that's the only reason that that garden is like surviving our hot summer. So anyway, that's my suggestion, is like interspersing the native trees to not only put nitrogen in the ground, but also to shade it as Tucson's temperatures are going to continue to rise.
Yeah, so the woman, what's her name?
Jana.
Jana is, oh, Jana, I know, Jana Siegel.
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, the suggestion is to do some agroforestry, which is mixing legume trees with other crops to provide shade and also provide nitrogen to the soil. And yes, definitely, that is definitely part of the plan. Actually, the only thing that exists right now is a mesquite and a scrubby mesquite in the garden.
So we've got these other mesquites in the larger project area as well, outside the wall.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the things we want to try with plant guilds, experimenting with different combination and companion cropping. We're already doing that in the garden. We have a lot of success with chiltepines on the northeast of these native trees. Selected natives is the first thing on my kind of list after shade for this garden. Selected native crops. So not every mesquite is a good mesquite, right? So how do you clone the good ones and put them in and have an mesquite is an excellent crop for our region. And the problem is you can't grow, you know, the seed, it's not true to seed, so you have to propagate with vegetative propagation, clone the ones that are good, so that, and that's a whole thing, right? That's a whole kind of learning how to do that and doing that on a kind of scale. That's why farmers haven't done it, I think, but it definitely is a great potential. Other native crops, prickly pear, agave. We have a prickly pear, a whole row of like, I think 25 different varieties of prickly pear for fruit and for vegetable. Right, beyond the Tomorrow's Garden. So that's why I think, you know, it's kind of expanding right out of this plot, because conceptually, there's a lot of things right around it that also we're thinking of. This is a really steep slope, so that's a good place to grow agaves. You know, Palo Verde, mesquite, prickly pear, ironwood. Have you ever tasted ironwood pots? It's like desert edamame, right? So yeah, definitely those are great ideas. And not only just using shade cloth or solar panels, but also trees, right, to shade. The problem with mesquite is you gotta be really careful, because it's really competitive and it likes to win. So, putting your crops underneath the mesquite, not so good because you're gonna get too much shade. And I think there's also some competitive like allelopathy going on there. I've read some articles that kind of contradict what people are kind of thinking about growing crops under mesquite. And I think people who have experience doing it have had some issues. So I'd like to hear about your own personal experiences, yes.
So I'm still forming these thoughts.
Uh-huh, fine.
But your focus here is what would, like a demonstration garden for things that would be successful. Things grow and ways to grow in the future, right? So when I'm listening to the soil enrichment, it kind of contradicts or contrasts in my head with the native plants that grow really well in a non-traditionally enriched soil. And I was wondering if there could be kind of a gradient from maybe something that had a higher elevation and didn't catch as much rainwater, but that more of that sandy soil, you know, going down into more like we think of enriched soil kind of things to see how like the different things would grow in different conditions. I have something. Yeah. That was just.
Okay, do you want me to answer that one first?
Do that one first. 'Cause
Okay,
people online-
so really good question. When you're talking about rich, fertile, healthy soil, is that a good soil to plant native plants in? And that's a really good question. I was just talking with Yadi Wang, who's also on our committee, and he's a total soil nerd, chemist, and is just new to farming, but is a farm manager at a regenerative certified, Arizona's only regenerative certified organic farm. And he, you know, he's gonna be on this panel of like next week at the agave, like as agave as a potential crop for the future for this region, less water thirsty. And he said he read this paper that like the C4 plants, like the plants that the desert plants, right? The C4 plants with the special metabolism. When you plant them and you irrigate them in richer soil and especially irrigation, they act like C3 plants.
Wow.
Yeah, so like they're emitting more carbon dioxide and so like, yes, that's a really good question. Like, where is it a good idea to be planting these native crops with this really rich soil and giving them water to like just boost the production a little bit? Maybe it'd be better like this area right here, this slope right here, it's really sandy, really, it's not like a rich fertile soil that we have on the bottom of the basin. So maybe, yeah, maybe on the slopes would be better.
And this
Yeah.
is the advantage too. We weren't real clear here, but this
That's our wall.
thick black line, sort of two-thirds of the way down from the top is the garden wall, and then going north on the right side there. And the plot I pointed to in the earlier aerial photo was just this area here, but one of the advantages of opening up the larger project area to outside the wall, which by the way can be accessed by this gate. We almost never use this gate here, but we could put you know, a traditional fence out here around some of this to enclose it to some extent, and then have this gate open when we're open to the public, so people can wander out there. And then there is a slope here up onto the flood or up onto the landfill. And so some of these existing mesquites are already up there. And then like Dena said, we've got the depression, the swale here where stormwater flows. So we've got a lot of different land forms in a small area with with potential to do a lot of this kind of interspersing of things.
Can I go back to answer real quick one of Jana's questions about water harvesting off a mountain? That's been something that we've been thinking about since 2012. There was a workshop of, you know, Brad Lancaster, et cetera, going up there and looking at like, what would that look like if we were to harvest? And right now we have an NPS grant with historic preservation. And so we have a water harvesting project that we can look at least designing. And that's the first thing, you know, we were thinking is, how can we go to the top of the watershed and start infiltrating that water? And we've been talking with Watershed Management Group and also a landscape design company that's gonna do a drainage assessment and everything. It's looking like A Mountain is in pretty good shape, like we don't have any erosion problems, we don't have issues. And we are actually harvesting the water. It used to be when it rained really hard, all of these swales would go, all this water would go, and it would go right down to the river. We had massive, you know, the bridge you go over when you come to Mission Garden, that would like flowing water. Now, we've been doing we've been doing a lot of rainwater harvesting passively with you know, what it's called, the little semicircles around with
Swales.
rocks, little swales around the trees to the west of the garden. We've been doing a lot of rock alignments all along here. There's a lot of trees and a lot of growth now that used to be completely barren. All of this is all planted and a lot of things, you know, down close to the swale. So we don't get those, we're harvesting that water off of A Mountain, like it or not. And we're not going to the top of the watershed and like putting rock features to stop it all the way from the top. That might happen. But it looks like it's not really necessarily gonna be beneficial.
One of the really interesting ideas that's come up is a good deal of that water that comes off A Mountain and off Grande Road ends up on the west side of the garden and then runs around the north side of the garden. And on the west side of the garden, there's been a proposal to do a dry well, which would harvest some of that water and get it down into the ground and give us credits for recharging water there. So that's another possibility for the water up. And I think she has a follow-up question.
Yeah,
I did.
back there.
Sorry.
Thank you. So on an almost completely different subject, since part of the focus is looking toward, like you said, regenerative or less sustainable systems in the future, I know that we're talking a lot about how it affects humans and how well that may or may not make the plants grow. I wonder if you could put in some educational components on pollinators and insects, because a lot of times when people are going and seeing the plants, they don't think about that aspect of the system unless there happens to be a hummingbird at the flower in front of them at the moment. You know, so maybe some kind of signage or demonstration or thing that would help them to see when the hummingbird is not there, that how those systems interact. Even though a big problem we're having with sustainability is, like you said, our soil depletion and our problems with putting in a lot of pesticides that are harming our biodiversity, specifically as it pertains to local pollination, you know, things that are specific to different species.
Can I just say that, well, the question is about encouraging pollinators and educating about pollination. We have, I think, because we are organic, we have a lot of pollinators in the garden. The other kind of cool thing about having such a diversity of plants, both native and crops, is we have a huge diversity of insects coming to them and other pests like mice and cotton rats and things. And so we're developing, we do have to do some control of some pests with organic methods, but we're also developing a natural biocontrol. So there are a lot of insects that parasitize or eat other insects like wasps and praying mantises. There are a lot of lizards running around eating insects. There's a lot of birds running around eating insects. There's, of course, Kevin, the roadrunner, who runs around eating an enormous range of things, that many of which are pests, insects, grubs, grasshoppers, caterpillars, I've seen them eat, and mice, and baby cotton rats, and any number of things. So
aphids. Yeah, we love pollinators and people since the beginning, everybody's like, oh, we have to have pollinator pockets and we have to have pollinator hedgerows. And I'm like, look around, like the whole garden is a pollinator hedgerow, but you're right about the education. It's so important. And that is, you know, from the very get-go with the autumn people, we're like, it has to be an hands-on garden. Like you can go there and you can get your hands in the, you know, do stuff, especially kids, right? And like interactive. So that's really important. And the pollinators, of course,
And this is
are.
also why, in the backyard level, in the neighborhood level, it's so useful to have a whole neighborhood, not just your backyard, landscaped in a way that accomplishes getting pollinators and accomplishes this biocontrol. Because Mission Garden at almost 4 acres has this great advantage over most backyard gardens. And that is, in a backyard garden, you might have one fig tree, and if a pest comes, it's going to be a real problem. There's nothing to counteract it. If you have one, you know, grapevine, the birds come, the 20 birds around there come and eat all of the fruit. But in Mission Garden, the 20 birds that are around there come and eat, but we have so much of it that they can't get it all. So there's economies of scale or issues of scale here that are hard to accomplish in backyards and neighborhoods, but that could be accomplished with the right kind of landscaping. And without all of this landscaping, that's just completely ornamental and not edible.
Jana also said Palo Verde for shade and nitrogen. You can mention that again.
Yes, Palo Verde for shade and nitrogen. Definitely. We love Palo Verde. Tiddlywinks. It's like eating tiddlywinks.
There was another question you've spoken about
I'm dating
engaging
myself.
the youth as a goal. My suggestion would be to include a play-based interactive educational installation for young children who visit Tomorrow's Garden. That was from Darcy.
A play-based interactive educational.
Installation, very good. For
For
young children.
Yeah, we're all for that. That's our motto. Yeah. Yes, we
Well,
totally agree.
Our motto is tasting history, but
Yeah.
we should add to it.
Well, that's,
Whatever
you
that
know,
is.
play, tasting is play, right? Like,
And we do have the bookworm path, 20 locations around the garden where kids can, in big boxes can find books and activities for kids, each one about a different relevant topic. But yeah, we're looking for more educational things for kids. That's definitely on the list, the to-do list for Mission Garden.
to end for the Tomorrow's Garden specifically.
I had a question about, have you thought about, since you're talking about regenerative a little bit, which includes animals as well, have you thought about incorporating animals into the
Oh,
mix?
Of course, that was one of Yadi's ideas, of
Repeat
course.
the question.
Yes, he's asking about, have we thought about incorporating animals? Yes, we are definitely thinking about doing like chicken tractors, you know, Yadi wants to do chicken jungles, but that's, we have from experience know that they will not last one night. Because we have bobcats and we have, well, a coyote came in. So one of our wonderful volunteers thought it was fine to open the chicken coop the other day, during opening hours. Tons of people in the garden, the coyotes are watching and they were like, okay, came in the gate, grabbed the chicken. Opening hours, everybody was like, what is going on here? Yeah, we can't. So, but chicken tractors, which are, you know, like, little fenced
Yep.
pens that you can move around to enhance the soil and stuff. Yes, that's definitely, and the kids love the chickens. And we have chickens in the chicken coop anyway, so we can just take them out and they can improve their diet by going around and we can't let them out because they'll get. So, yes, animals are really important. I think it's important to reduce our amount of meat for sure, especially beef, because of the water use and how much is, you, especially here, like I lived for 24 years in Spain, in grassy Spain, where cows like is the only thing that makes sense. You know, it's very hilly and they eat the grass and it's great. But here, it just doesn't make sense to be growing alfalfa on a huge scale. And then, yeah, it just doesn't make sense. So, but but animals, if you do farming, if you do gardening, you know how important animals can be, right? What they can contribute in by way of manure and by way of how they can adequately manage, they can really improve the soil. So yes, animals can be definitely a part of future sustainable farming system for sure.
So I think we come to the end of our time. We're at 8 o'clock. I really appreciate you guys both coming and presenting to us today. It was fantastic. So